Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Stephen King podcast. And couldn't keep him away. He's back again. Jesse, welcome, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you, Lou. I'm very excited to be back in the Stephen King universe. We have a fun one to talk about today.
Yes. And joining me, as always, is co-host Karen. How are you doing, Karen?
Hello, I'm good. I'm glad to see Jesse back as well.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome sauce.
Yeah. So listeners are getting a lot of Mr. Harrigan. So why don't we just do a quick round the table? What did we overall think of the Netflix Mr. Harrigan's phone, Karen?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I really liked it. I think the acting was superb. They did a great job interpreting the story without giving us all the minutia. And it was a very entertaining, hour and 40 minutes or something like that. I liked it a lot. And that's saying something because there are a lot of adaptations that I hate, but this one was really good.
Okay. Jesse.
Yeah, I really like this. This happened very quickly for me.
Mm-hmm.
We watched the preview. I ended up reading the story, and now then the movie's out. So I didn't have it like this years of anticipation or something. This like bang, bang, bang with me. And I really liked this. It often feels like Stephen King's novellas, he exercises other muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is, I think, similar to different seasons. This certainly has a share of horror discussion in this, but also a little social commentary about our cell phones and our dependency on them, I think is really good. I was sharing them before we recorded yesterday afternoon. My son Chris is over. He is most weekends during the Cowboy season because we end up watching the Cowboy game together. And so yesterday afternoon, my wife Linda was taking a nap and Chris said, "What do you want to watch?" And I said, "Well, really would like to watch this movie." I said, "Stephen King." And he goes, "Oh, well, it's Halloween. Sure, let's go for it." And so he ended up watching it with me and he liked it a lot too. And we ended up having a discussion, I think, similar to what we're going to have today between him and I about what some of the story means, some thoughts on it. And so I really do think this was a very good adaptation with some really strong acting from our two leads and then even the supporting characters.
I enjoyed it overall. I don't particularly place this story up in the top half of Stephen King's work. It's a solid story, and I thought the adaptation was done solidly as well. It's very faithful to the source material, and I appreciated from that fact. As you said, the leads, I thought Donald Sutherland was fantastic, and Jaden Martell was pretty good too. There's certain adaptational difficulties because when you're doing scenes of people reading to each other, that's not the most exciting thing. So I thought it's done about as well as they could be. My real big niggle with this, it felt very claustrophobic at times because there was a lot of scenes where beyond the principal actors, there'd be a lot of supporting characters, but a lot of times they had little or no dialogue at all. So it was always like they were just, after a while, they just felt like props to me as opposed to actual characters. And I assume that there must have been budget restriction issues as to why that happened, but that it could have been a little fleshed out around the main characters a little bit more, and it would have felt a little more alive. But you could also argue that this is a very personal story from the protagonist, so that the focus is through his perspective on things as well. So all the background things that he didn't notice or focus on were not important to him. But as a viewer, I just felt a little times like I was being led down a chute during certain sequences. But I really did enjoy the scenes with Donald Sutherland. I thought he really nailed it, and I really missed his absence after his character passed away in the episode, in the movie as well. So let's run with the protagonist, who is Craig, Jaden Martell, who played Bill in the most recent adaptation of Stephen King's It. And Jesse, you touched on probably the most interesting part was Mr. Harrigan's initial reaction and analysis of what the internet represented. Why don't you talk about that, and maybe you can bring in your son's perspective, because he's of a generation where the internet has always been around. So I'm curious how that went for you guys.
Yeah, so obviously we're watching this, and I remember the scene from the book, and then doing that. Well, there's no paywall, there's no digital ads, there's this thing. And Chris looked over at me and said, he's nailing it, isn't he? He's exactly fake news and all this stuff. And I said, well, to be fair, Stephen King is writing from, he knows what's going to happen. But yes, this character is very insightful. And it was funny, Chris, later that night, I was watching something on TV, and he says, pause this for a minute. He goes, I've been thinking about that. Do we own things or do they own us? He says, and I think that's pretty insightful. Mm-hmm. And I go, yeah, I do think it is. And then we got in a whole discussion about that, the whole being addicted to holding that phone. I very seldom do I watch TV without my phone in my hand, either looking up things that I want to look up at, doing things. And so I think that's very interesting, that it's good and bad. It is a gift, but it also could be a curse. And the idea that our main character, Mr. Harrigan, recognizes that away shows how intelligent he is and how he does it. And I love his thing. I listen to the radio in the car, but I don't have a radio here in the house, because then I would listen to it. I don't have a television because then I would watch it. And I guess he just wants to spend his time reading and looking at books. So I think it is very insightful, yet at the same time entertaining. I don't feel like Stephen King was beating us over the head with, okay, you shouldn't be at your phone so much. But I do think that is a side product of this little tale he wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, everything he said, really. I did appreciate that it was like, if I have this, I'll use it, and I don't see the need. They didn't really get into the whole making things free or paying for it like they did in the short story. Mm-hmm. So I missed that, because that's a really relevant thing for when the story was set. But again, you can see where they gloss over certain things. I also like that he eschewed it at first, and then once he got the phone and started looking at stuff, he was really into it, which was cool. Again, they added that in, which was great, kept it in. So yeah, I liked it. I liked the implications that it gave for how we view technology and the downsides or the upsides of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious how you guys reacted to the character of Mr. Harrigan, especially because we saw Craig looking up his biography, basically, and seeing everything on there was pretty negative. And it wasn't until we got the reveal of what was in the closet that we understood really why Mr. Harrigan chose Craig as the person he wanted to read to him. So, Karen, what did you think about that aspect of the character? Because thinking without that last scene, that Harrigan wouldn't have been as sympathetic a character as
Agreed.
We would have, because he was hard to like beyond his interactions with Craig, right?
Right. Especially after you see all the things that Craig sees is it a microfiche? I guess it's a microfiche in the library. Who uses those anymore? But man, I used them a lot before technology. And at that point, you're thinking, well, this guy is just a jerk, and what redeeming qualities does he have? But then that reveals that behind the scenes, he's not that guy. And I say this a lot, so excuse me if you're upset by it, but I really enjoy bad guys that aren't all black. They're gray. And I think in this case, even though he's not a bad guy, like the bad guy of the story, the big bad, I like that they made him very gray. And it's almost like he found redemption at a certain point in his life. Like, I'm bad without compromise as a young guy. And then once I started getting older, I realized that that wasn't the way to go. And so that reveal was, I think, necessary in the movie, because people need to like him. And even if it's just a retroactive, oh, okay, maybe he wasn't that bad. Even just at the end of the story made me happy. I enjoyed that they left that in. I was already sympathetic to him because I read the short story.
Mhm.
and you read the short story and Jesse did. But I think someone coming from a perspective of never knowing the story ahead of time, I think that was 100% necessary.
Right. Jesse?
So yeah, I think the reveal of what's in the secret closet, right, is all his memories.
Mhm.
And I think it's, for me, and I don't think this is unique perspective, is Mr. Harrigan saw Craig and he saw that Craig has the potential to be him,
Mhm.
right? That they have this thing. And the idea that Harrigan made a lot of money, but he did it. And I go back to, which I don't think anyone had on their bingo card, Pretty Woman, where the Richard Gere character made a lot of money by buying companies and breaking them apart
Right.
and selling them for pieces. And at the end of the movie, he decides, I want to build something. I want to make something, right?
Right.
But love changes him.
Yes, love changes him. Absolutely.
That's a big trope in romance novels as
Yes.
well. But yeah.
And so George is unhappy that he changed. So he ends up going and being best friends with Jerry Seinfeld.
Right.
In this case, Mr. Harrigan is saying, maybe this is a different way to see how my life could have been. And
Mhm.
then we get the reveal that, at least of my mind, right, is that Craig has the capacity and the thought, maybe the inclination, to be cold like this guy.
Mhm.
And so the ends up from beyond, whatever we decide, you don't want to go down this path again. And he ends up not choosing that path, which I think is really good. I read somewhere on Twitter, they said, I didn't like the cliffhanger ending of the movie. And I was like, I didn't find a cliffhanger ending at all. I think it
No.
very much said, I have a choice. I can either
Mhm.
turn right or I can turn left. And turning right would be, I'm going down a path of destruction. Turning left, I'm ignoring that. And I think he turned left.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very clear there's no, that's an odd take.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I think he
ahead.
was also not just going down the wrong path, but his life was very lonely.
Yes.
And losing his mother was a big part of that loneliness. He didn't want to let anyone in, or at least, that's the inference I take from it. But I think he also wanted to save Craig from that, not just being bad, but also just being alone
Yeah.
when they got older. So
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like the final scene where he's at the quarry, there was more of a suggestion that he might actually jump in himself. It's like I almost got that feeling, but he threw his old iPhone in. It was interesting that he thought for a second about throwing his current phone in, but in the end he decided to keep it. So I think that's where that's that attraction, because even like Harrigan, when he said he doesn't want that, that's a devil's tool or whatever. But once he got it, I just love the scene where Craig was reading to him and Harrigan was totally engrossed in his iPhone. Right?
Yes.
That was a nice touch. So I don't really see, I don't see a cliffhanger there at all. I did like the point you made, Karen, about Craig's coming from a broken home with his mother dying young, which again, we just saw that's a chestnut that King's pulled out just in fairy tale as well. And in King's life, his father left when he was quite young. So, and back in the 50s and that was really tough for a single mom to try to raise kids and hold a job down too. Beyond the societal black eye that she was carrying from that, it makes me wonder that, like, it seems like the great artists that we all love and appreciate have a lot come from, like, usually tragic starts in their life. And I think this is echoed again in this story. And one of the story books they're reading is it Dombey and Son? I think is the title. It's Dombey something. And Harrigan says the moral of the story is that the true value of money is measured in power. And I have to think that King realizes that more than most people would, because he's come from poverty, basically, with his mom. And then at one point he basically won the lottery when he got the paperback rights for Carrie for like $400,000 back in the 70s, which was for a guy that's been working on a laundromat and as a teacher, is an amazing amount of money to come into. And Craig has the same experience here because Harrigan's left him $800,000. So I don't know how much autobiographical you could consider this in comparison to King's life, but the lessons in the story are things that King's learned in real life, which gives this, beyond his ability to write interesting characters, gives a story that ring of authenticity that I really like. And I think that the nice touch was, and it's not in the short story, is adding the Stand By Your Man as the ringtone. I loved the Pirate King handle, which was a good handle. But yeah, but there's more under the surface of the story that, if you know King's background at all, I think it makes it ring probably a bit more than if you were just a casual watcher. So I don't know what you think about that, Jesse.
So yeah, I did like that. I think it's funny that Mr. Harrigan likes country and Western music, both kinds of music, right? Country and Western.
Hello, the Blues Brothers.
Yes, indeed. And yes, there was that great scene where Craig is reading to him and he's busy staring at his phone. Chris asked if is there significance to the books he's reading? And I said, as far as I know, I don't think there is, except that they're pretty heavy books. He's not reading Louis L'Amour or Jeffrey Archer or Jack Reacher books to him, which all three I love, by the way. I'm not sure to get off. I don't know if there was any significance to the books he's reading, and is there a tie-in?
I think there was. But...
Okay, go good. Please share.
Well, we already talked about the Dumby and Son story about the true value of money.
Yeah.
And there was the Heart of Darkness, which is about a man on a personal mission on his own, with the world against him, and the horror. So, you can watch Apocalypse Now and get a lot more into that. And I think that's mirroring Harrigan's loneliness and his life based on all those newspaper headlines that we saw about the things that he was doing. So I think and I don't remember all the books off the top of my head, so I can't say what, but I definitely do think that they were meant to underscore points, either, if not for Harrigan, for Craig. So yeah, those definitely were deliberately chosen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah, they were picked on purpose, but I don't think that they were meant to like make an overt statement to you. I just think that they were picked on purpose to tie in with the story.
Okay. So anyway, what was your question now? I got distracted, right? After thinking about this.
I don't remember
either. It was to do with the hardship backgrounds that both these characters shared.
Yeah, and so it was a little confusing because I had just read Fairy Tale, and it's a young man spending time with an older gentleman with a mother who's passed and a father that's not dealing with that grief very well. I was like, okay, wait a minute. So is Craig's dad an alcoholic? No. Wrong story.
Right.
Wrong story.
Right.
Right. So, because I kept wanting to tell Chris, no, wrong story. So I think that, and I do wonder, like, once he won the money, I guess you couldn't pay off the bully because the bully would have kept going back for more, but it feels like hey, dude, okay, how about I give you $200? Go buy your own phone and leave me alone from now on, right? I've bought protection, leave me alone. But I guess the young man, which they play it as if he has possibly not only social adjustments, but mental adjustments. He does seem to be a awkward young man with a lot of different things. So yeah, I like the idea that there is echoes to each other. And there's that great scene where you see all those lottery tickets and he goes, I guess he doesn't have many friends, right? So he's very lonely. And we see that Craig is making friends. He is building his own network, even if it is the iPhone crowd in the cafeteria. Yeah.
That's an interesting point too. And Karen, I'll let you kick it off. What did you think of those cafeteria scenes where people were sitting based on what type of phone they had? I thought that was kind of weird.
I mean, again, it's an echo of what's happening in real life. I hate Apple products. I used to think that they were okay. And I know I've said this before as well, so sorry for repeating myself. I used to think that they were okay, but then they became this money machine where, hey, even if your iPhone is still good, you got to upgrade it because we got all these new features and you got to pay another $1,000 for a phone. So I am all Android all the time and PC. So I've had many discussions with my friends, with my coworkers on Twitter about how I feel. And I don't censor anyone for liking Apple, but I might think a little less of them for buying into this whole, and not because they like Apple, but because they buy into the whole I gotta upgrade. And I think that it really did echo what happens in that we got iPhone people, we got generic phone people, and there wasn't Androids back then, but let's just use that as an example, a different OS user table. That happened. It didn't happen in my high school, but it's because we didn't have cell phones when I went to high school. Exactly. So I don't know whether that really happens or not. Not only did we not have internet, we didn't have cell phones, like literally didn't have cell phones. I had a boss just after high school that had a car phone. That was a big deal. It was hardwired into her car. Yeah. So, I mean, you couldn't use it outside the car, if that tells you how old I am. But we did have cliques in high school, cliques. And I straddled the line. When I lived in California, I played sports, but I was also a nerd. So I could go back and forth, but they were separate. Right. If my nerd friends didn't play sports, they weren't allowed to be over with the sports people. And then I shattered my leg and coming here to this coast, didn't play sports, but I wasn't unpopular. I was a nerd. I was a choir nerd and also a learning nerd. But our high school had quite a few senators and congressmen's sons and daughters in it. My father was up there, not a congressman or senator, but he had a lot to do with them. So those people knew who I was. And so I could associate with those people. And again, I saw it from the outside, seeing that my choir friends, if they didn't grow up with those people, they could be excluded. They were looked down upon. And even within the music department, choir friends didn't like the orchestra friends, didn't like the marching band friends. So having a clique was, I mean, it's not something that's new, but having it based on cell phones, I thought was very humorous and also really relatable to what happens in school for realsies. And maybe you guys can tell me, not you guys, because we all come from the same era. Listeners can tell me, does that happen? Do people get a click based on what cell phone they use? I know if you had a Trapper Keeper when I was in middle school, one of those binders, with all the little pockets and everything, oh, you were super cool. But if you had like the generic Trapper Keeper, oh man, you must live in the slums. We can't talk to you. That's generic. Right. So was it based on that, or I'm not sure, but I thought it was funny.
Yeah. I do want to touch on at least one more scene with Donald Sutherland. The heart of the characters, the thing that they were both looking for as connections with people, was when Harrigan asked Craig why he kept coming over all those years, and Craig was reluctant to say the real reasons why, and then finally he said it all out that he just basically liked being with them. And I thought Donald Sutherland's reaction to that outburst was really heart-wrenching, and it's all just in subtle facial tics and movements and that, but that to me was the heart of the movie, and that's real talented acting right there. I thought that was just an amazing scene. I'm hoping you felt the same way, Jesse.
I did want to share probably a little bit into the insight. Chris is going, Mom. He calls her LJ. Long story. But anyway, he's like, LJ would just be, why are you letting your young son go to this guy's house? Right. Are you like, do you not care? There's no reason why this old man wants a kid there at his house. This is protect him. I thought it was interesting that they didn't explain but it was implied, right? Craig ended up speaking at church, and Mr. Harrigan was so impressed with his diction and the way he spoke. That's why this led to it. Chris did say, $5 an hour? I've been doing this 4 or 5 years. Isn't it time to kick it up a little bit of extra money? Chris also wanted to go, okay, you couldn't have gone a clear million. 800,000, right? Okay, you couldn't have just rounded up, but I said, well, don't get greedy. No, I'm just saying. Yeah, I think that very old man that has made choices that have left him very rich, but lonely, and doesn't know how to not be lonely, right? It's just so there. And so this Craig likes spending time with him. He talks about his father is a little more distant after his mother. Was that not first off, I don't understand why his dad did not go with him to check into college. That is one of the best moments in my adult life, is when Chris got accepted into college and us going to Stephen F. Austin and setting him up in his dorm room. So I guess it made for a very poignant scene in the rearview mirror, he's seeing his dad and his mother. Yeah. And then you see that she's not really there. It's just, his mind. So Craig is lonely and it finds a connection similar to maybe like, I don't say a father image because his father is still there, though a little distance, but a uncle or someone who is someone he enjoys. And so it was a very mutually beneficial relationship, and which is why Mr. Harrigan at the time seemed to be very touched when Craig explains why we're still hanging together.
Yeah, I got a little teary at several points, which really speaks to the performances, especially of Donald Sutherland. Like you said, very nuanced. He didn't have to say something to show you what he was feeling. And that is much more powerful than someone coming out and going, oh, I'm touched, you like me. He didn't say that. He literally just expressed it without words, without saying it. And to me, that's much more touching. And I do think I get in my head also, why is this kid being allowed to go spend all this time with this old guy? But in this case, I do think it has a lot to do with the fact that they go to church. And so even though people don't love Mr. Harrigan, they at least know that he's a decent guy. That's not true all the time, but in this case, I think that the father thought, well, I don't love it, but he seems to be an okay guy. He's never done anything. I don't see the harm in it. Kids did have jobs for people back then, 10 years ago. It's looked down upon more now because of things that have happened. But, people would go and they would do chores around some old lady's house or something. Yep. It happened. So it's not unfeasible to me. I can see where people would go, why would the dad let the kid go down there? But it's feasible to me. And I really, really enjoyed their interactions. Again, I got very teary a couple times. When he came in and found Mr. Harrigan dead, oh man, tears. I was really sad because Jaden Martell, he emoted to a degree that wasn't so overt that you go, oh, come on, why would he be feeling that? But enough that you knew he was gutted by this.
Yeah, especially because the last thing Harrigan was trying to do was to call him.
Right, exactly. And it was just so emotionally charged.
Yeah, and I said, like, whoa, Chris, I know he wouldn't, but I made the joke, like, Craig's going to take all those lottery tickets, right, and throw them in the bag for him. But no, his dad says, get out of the house. And instead, he sits there and keeps Mr. Harrigan's body company. He reads to him, the way of the group. I thought that was a very touching moment. And really, really shows that how much he cared about him.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting with like actors at Donald Sutherland's age. It must be really creepy for them to play these scenes where they're lying in a coffin, because they must be thinking like that this is not going to be that far down the road. I don't know what his health situation is, because in the movie he's pretty sedentary. But as far as I know, I don't think he has any major health problems. I think he can still get around quite fine. But he can still act. That's for sure. And that's the thing. You got that if you could have that lifetime of experience as an actor when you're young, it could be so amazing, because like typically for most actors, it's like you get by on your looks when you're younger. And then as you get more roles and that you get more experience, you become as better as an actor in that. I mean, there's obviously exceptions to that. And we've seen other people that are able to act right out of the gate. But if he could bring what he's got now to what he was doing before, it'd be like, wow, because you just watch him. And maybe it's me getting older too, then I'm just projecting my own thoughts and situations onto his face and that. But I was really impressed with what he did. And I knew that when he got cast in that role that he would do a good job, and he definitely did. And those scenes were the ones that had the most care, I think, in the movie. And like there were some other good performances. Like I did like the guy that played the bully. I've seen him in Cyrus Arnold. He played Kenny Yankovic. He was in, I don't know if you guys were familiar with the Exorcist TV series that ran for a couple of seasons. There's I think the third season's, and it's got John Chu from Star Trek and another, like you think he's a solid actor in those movies, but if you see him in that series. And he also did another, like a movie where it was basically like almost like a Rear Window, except his play the father whose daughter was gone missing, and all the communications were through his cell phone with her. And I can't remember what it's called, but if you look up his biography, it's a nifty little thriller. And he carries that picture. He's basically just talking to this computer screen. So you're seeing it's like a full face on kind of thing. It's quite intense. But Cyrus Arnold was in that series, and he played the child with problems, interesting enough. But in that one, he's a very sympathetic character. So to see him in this one, and they really made him look like a menacing Hulk at times, like he was all mouth and like he was going to swallow him and stuff like that. So I was pretty happy with his performance. And of course, the teacher who we just saw recently was in the Sandman, has played Death. She was pretty good as the teacher too, though I wish she would have had a little more screen time. So why don't you talk about those two, Karen?
Yeah, that's one of my biggest nits, is we didn't get that whole storyline with teacher Miss Hart. Mm-hmm. That was a big part of that short story, that she helped him after he got beat up. Yeah. And that's a lot of why he is gutted when she dies. And so I missed that, not to mention the fact that Kirby Howell Baptiste is one of my favorite like character side actresses. Mm-hmm. I fell in love with her on The Good Place, and then she gets all these other roles, and I'm just delighted to see her in them. She's so good, and I thought she was fantastic in this. I wish they would have fleshed out her story a little more. I don't know what they would have taken out to allow that, so I get why they did it. Cyrus Arnold, I've never seen him in anything. I'll have to check out the Exorcist TV show. He was good as Kenny Yankovic. Or Yankovic. I'm not sure whether they pronounced it or not. But anyway, he was very menacing. I like that they picked an actor that would be menacing to Jaden, to Craig. He's bigger. He's more unkempt. He is just, and again, loud, angry, whereas Craig is just completely the polar opposite of that. He's slim, shorter. He takes care of himself, very meticulous, much more of a nerd into technology and all that. And he reads, and we just know that the character played by Cyrus Arnold fits that body. I think it was a really good casting choice. And both of those characters, they also changed how he died. Right? He jumped off of something instead of being suffocated. I don't remember what. Did he hang himself in the book? I don't remember. Anyway.
He did.
Yeah, he hung himself instead of jumping off of something, which I don't know why that was changed, but interesting at least. Mm-hmm. And also the fact that they showed the accident with Miss Hart, that had an impact as well. I think a huge impact. In the book, they didn't really describe the accident, just that it happened, and it was impactful in the book too. And I think it was because we got all that story between her and Craig. And I think seeing the accident does that same thing for us. Mm-hmm. Shows her as like, she was so in love. She was going to get married to this guy. They were having a fun day. They were joking around with each other. And then her life ends. And so that gives us that investment in her character, that much more of just she's my teacher thing. So yeah, that was the one thing that I missed, was the interactions between Craig and Miss Hart, and why he had a crush on her and that sort of thing. But otherwise, again, exemplary performances from those two actors. And I love how Stephen King has a way of finding young actors that their talent is beyond their years.
Mm-hmm.
He could pick young people that didn't act as well. But I think Jaden Martell, he didn't shrink when he was in scenes with Donald Sutherland. You could see his talent as well. Whereas if a lesser actor played scenes with Donald Sutherland, they would get lost. And I just really appreciated Cyrus's and Jaden's performances in these two characters. They were multi-layered, multifaceted, just really good.
Yep. Jesse?
So I really enjoyed, I think it was, I would have certainly liked more of interactions with the teacher, but I understand there's limited time. I do agree the actress is amazing, and it does seem like all of a sudden she's showing up several places. You're like, what, wow, how did this happen? That all of a sudden things. I did want to mention that Craig looks like he could be the younger brother or son of a couple of the actors, like the McCalkin kid on Succession, kind of has that look.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Kimberly Howe Baptiste is just amazing. And I've really thought she, in the limited amount of screen time, showed how you would have a little bit of a crush on her, and that she's really good at what she does. Speaking of it, she's also very good in Killing Eve. She had a part in Killing Eve. So yeah, great. I did not like the bully as much as you guys did. I thought he was a little too one note, but I think that was the purpose of what they wanted to do. And I do think that from Craig's talk about it, right? Like, I don't think about someone who's my bully or someone having family, having this other side to them, that they're someone's baby. They're someone's son or daughter that they love. And so I thought that was a nice twist. And I think as we get through this, the idea that Craig has a magic bullet, and he has a magic card that if he ever wants to get revenge, he can play it. And I brought back to The Sopranos, where in the very first season, the episode Employee of the Month, where Melfi, spoilers, was raped, and she doesn't tell Tony Soprano about it. If she did, she knew that person would be punished, and that person would be punished by being killed. And she kept her moral and said, no, I can't do that. And so by Craig going to this well twice, he sees himself that this is not something good. And whereas I talked about earlier, I'm going to turn a different way than what I could. And to make sure I'm not tempted, I'm going to get rid of this almost monkey's paw as I mix my metaphors.
Right. Yep. No. Yeah. That's a great point. And it's interesting that they play it that Craig's not sure if Mr. Harrigan's asking him to stop because it's hurting Mr. Harrigan, or because it's hurting him, or maybe it's hurting both of them. So
yeah,
it's a symbolism applied to the cell phone that goes beyond the evils that have been pointed out already. That thing, we don't own things own us. So
yeah,
but this owning would be at a whole nother level. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
And Jesse wanted to, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Jesse wanted to talk about the texts,
Right?
because he didn't. That was our conversation.
Yes, I do not understand what the text mean.
Right. And Lou and I talked about it in our first podcast about the story, but we didn't mention it when you joined us. They were capital C, lowercase a, and then the second one was a, lowercase a period, uppercase C, 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 and then a lowercase x.
Okay.
And the last one was uppercase C, 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 lowercase s, uppercase T. And the consensus is that the first message, CCCAA, is Craig and then knock, knock, from when he asks him to knock on the wall.
Okay.
The second one is when he asks for some kind of retaliation. If you hear me, please help me with this.
Yeah.
When he asks for, I guess it's Dean, for Dean to get, because he wasn't punished correctly,
Right.
to punish him. And so it's AA is his answering knock, knock, or whatever. And then Craig, and then the X would be I care for you, like kisses or whatever.
Okay.
I think that's the consensus there too.
Yep.
And then the last one, CCCST, would be stop. Craig, stop. And we don't, like Lou just said, we don't know whether it's, I choose to think that it's for Craig's own good, that Mr. Harrigan would do anything for Craig, but he knows that if Craig continues down that path, that it will affect him in a bad way.
Yes.
So, stop asking me to do these things for you because it will hurt you in the long run. And I really think that ask anything is, that really puts a kind of a extra dimension where he couldn't express himself that way when he was alive. And I guess he feels safer, quote unquote, saying, ask me anything, I'll do anything for you, in these messages. And they're also disguised, which probably helps a bit as well. Someone who doesn't normally say, I love you, find it okay to say XO at the end of a message.
Right.
Because it's disguised as something else. And so that X, I thought, was him, I can tell you I love you without coming out and saying it. And I couldn't even go this far in real life. So anyway, that's what the texts were. And I think Stephen King, he confirmed that the ST was stop on Twitter, but I don't know that we've seen him talk about the other. I think he wants to leave it kind of foggy.
Yeah, I think like the A's are like his version of knock knock.
Yeah.
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So I do think that there's an element, or I like to think there's an element that Harrigan also wants him to stop because with tied to that cell phone. And until Greg gets rid of it, the Harrigan can't move on either. So he's like in purgatory. So
I like that.
Because he's tied to that phone, right? And as long as that connection is there, so but that's just my interpretation.
No, I think that's a good one.
It might be a straight up, just it's not good for you, Craig, to have this power.
Or it could be all of the above, to be fair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, go ahead. You're going to say something?
No, go ahead.
No, okay.
Please.
So, overall, I thought this was a pretty faithful adaptation. I can't really complain from that perspective. Like I said, I felt a little claustrophobic in times because it was a lot of the supporting characters, especially the bully and the teacher, didn't get the appropriate amount of fleshing out that I think would have sold those parts of the story better. But it's just it's another version of like the monkey's paw in a way, I guess you could say. So it's a solid story, and the movie was a solid adaptation. It's not something that I would rave about as an story in itself. I thought, but the lead performances from the Jaden and Donald Sutherland were worth watching. But if you had to pick like the scenes that stood out the most, it was their scenes together. The rest of the movie was a little subdued in comparison.
Well, I go back to our discussion with Fairy Tale, and you asked the question, was I impatient to get to the quote unquote fairy tale part of it, to get into this alternate land? And I said, no, I was enjoying the time with our main character and his friend, right? The older man. Same thing here. I do think some people may be disappointed that if they
wasn't horrific enough.
Yes, it wasn't a really strong horror. It wasn't. And I think some people may go, okay, I get it. Cell phones are bad and we shouldn't spend all our time attached to them. But I thought it was cleverly done. And I think definitely the performances by the two leads and the teacher, what she had to do, gave enough that this was a really fun way to spend a Saturday afternoon watching this. And I'm glad we got to, not only because we got to talk about it, but I enjoyed the time and thought it was a pretty good movie.
And you got to spend time with your son,
Yes, absolutely.
which again is a big
Yeah,
deal.
and that was a
Yes.
good father-son story.
Absolutely,
too.
yes.
So that
Yeah.
was a bonus. You're welcome.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
All right. Well, that's going to do it. Again, Jesse, I thank you for coming back on. If this keeps going on, you might become a regular. Who knows?
Yes, I know. I need to and oh, by the way, this isn't Stephen King, but there is new Mike Hannigan material out now.
Yeah.
Right?
Flanagan.
Yes, Mike
Yes,
Flanagan.
Midnight Club. Yep.
Yes.
Did you watch it yet?
I haven't yet.
Okay, I started to, but it looks interesting. It's based on a series of books by Christopher Pike. I'm not familiar with
Yeah.
him.
He's like a
YA.
similar to R.L. Stein,
Yeah.
Right.
where he writes horror anthology novels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The critics have been kind to it, the few things I've seen. So I was
Mhm.
curious if you guys had started at all.
Not yet. No, I've also been watching the new Interview with a Vampire, and that's been pretty good so far too. So
Yeah, the Midnight Club's okay. The
Well,
acting is
it's
good,
kiddie.
but
Yeah.
it's not in my wheelhouse of things.
Okay.
So,
yeah, it's like what happened with Lock and Key from Joe
Mhm.
Hill. That's a much darker series than what it ended up. Netflix is a much more YA focused thing. So
Okay.
yeah.
Which
So it's a bit lighter.
some of them I
Yeah.
don't mind. Like
Yeah.
Stranger Things is, I think, has more depth to it than a YA typical
Yeah.
story. But
Yeah.
anyway, sorry.
Yep.
Good.
No, that's
All
cool.
right.
All right. So let's make our exits at this point, and we'll give all our relevant info. And Jesse, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Jesse Jackson DFW. You can hear Karen, Lou, and I talk Babylon 5. We are going through the classic series one episode at a time, and that has been a lot of fun. I hope you guys are checking it. Well, hopefully this episode will go on our feed. You can hear me talking music on Set Listing Bruce, where I have talked to Bruce Springsteen fans from around the world for the past 7 years. And Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast, where we are getting ready for Jodie's departure. Karen, how about you?
Yes, I am at Aliveria, Aleveria, on Twitter and other places as well. There's a link in my bio to my blog, and you can find other links there. I link to podcasts that I listen to that I recommend, other blogs that I like. Charles Skaggs, who's with you on Next Stop Everywhere, his blog link is there. So yeah, my blog and my handle. There you go.
There we go.
All righty. And of course, I'm at Lou's Reviews, where you can find this podcast and our Babylon 5, our JKL Media podcast. I do the writers' interviews. We're all there. And on Twitter, you can find me at Lou W. Sytsma or at S King Podcast. And until next time, as always, Jesse, thank you. Take care. And Karen, thank you.
No
Just
problem.
No talking. Everybody's just.
I said no problem.
Yeah,
Hi,
no
bye.
problem. Goodbye.
Okay,
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I was
And
waiting for
remember-
you. I didn't want to step on your tagline.
Oh, okay. Remember, everybody, stay safe, but stay scared. The end. Bool. Scene.
Bye.